The crew of the Baychimo thought they'd escaped a death sentence when they abandoned her to the Arctic ice in 1931. Trapped and left to her fate, she should have gone down like so many ships before her, but she refused to die. Nearly 40 years later, she was still being seen, drifting through frozen seas, empty and silent, her steel hull scarred but intact. The Baychimo became one of history's most documented ghost ships, and one of its strangest. Her story isn't just about a ship left behind. It's about what happens when the Arctic refuses to let go, and when a ship built for trade becomes a legend of endurance and mystery. Welcome to Shipwreck History. This is part 1 of our 4-part series on ghost ships. If you haven't already, hit the subscribe button. It goes a long way in helping our channel. The ship that would later become Baychimo began life in 1914 at the Lindholmen's shipyard in Gothenburg, Sweden. She was a steel-hulled cargo steamer, 230 feet long, and just over 1,300 gross tons. Modest, efficient, and built to handle northern waters. With a reinforced bow for ice and steady steam propulsion, she was designed for reliability over speed, a working ship meant to last. During the First World War, she served on northern European trade routes, operating through the constrained Baltic, where shifting alliances and blockades made every voyage a calculation of risk. In 1921, she was sold to the Hudson's Bay Company, who renamed her Baychimo and sent her into far harsher territory, the Arctic coast of Canada. The company needed a dependable vessel to reach their remote trading posts, as settlements lived and died by the short shipping season. Each summer, Baychimo carried flour, tea, tools, ammunition, and mail up north, and returned south with the year's harvest. Furs were gathered by indigenous trappers, who traveled for weeks or months to the company post, where supplies were traded for pelts that kept the enterprise alive. These voyages demanded precision and nerve. The shipping window opened only briefly, from July through early October, when ice retreated enough to clear a path. A new route had to be chosen each season, since Arctic currents and wind could shift channels by miles. Baychimo's circuit took her through the Bering Strait, along Alaska's north coast, and east into Canadian waters. She stopped at small outposts like Herschel Island, where goods had to be ferried to shore by small boats, because no harbors existed. Crews worked quickly, racing against the daylight and weather, knowing one sudden freeze could end the voyage. For nearly a decade, Baychimo made those journeys without major incident. She became a familiar sight to the communities she supplied, a lifeline in summer and vanishing as the ice came each fall. No one could have imagined she'd one day outlast them all, alone on the same waters. The 1931 season began like any other. Baychimo left Vancouver in July, under Captain Sidney Cornwell's command, carrying cargo and provisions for the Hudson's Bay Northern Trading Post. Through the summer she followed the familiar route along Alaska's coast, delivering supplies and collecting furs for the return journey. By early October, her work was nearly done, and the crew turned south toward home. Then, winter arrived early. On October 1st, pack ice closed around the ship near Point Barrow on the northern tip of Alaska. The ice held firm, locking the vessel in place but not crushing her. Cornwell had faced drifting ice before, but this freeze came fast and heavy. He couldn't tell whether it would release within days or hold for months. In 1931, forecasts relied on shortwave radio and scattered coastal reports, but none offered any certainty about what lay ahead. Each day the ice tightened its grip. The Baychimo drifted until she stood motionless, surrounded by an endless white plain. The season was finished, temperatures were falling, and her supplies were never meant to last through winter. Cornwell weighed the options and radioed Hudson's Bay for direction. If the hull began to crush, rescue would be impossible. On October 15th, company aircraft arrived to take most of the crew to safety. The landings on uneven ice were risky but successful. 22 men were flown out. 15 chose to stay, believing the ship might still break free once the weather shifted. They built a wooden shelter about half a mile from Baychimo, using lumber from the ship. It was basic, but secure enough to survive in. From there, they kept watch, checking the vessel daily and recording ice conditions while the light faded and the temperature dropped. The Arctic winter closed in quickly. Inside the shelter, the crew rationed supplies, repaired gear, and kept a small stove running. The work became routine: watch the ice, check the ship, and survive. On November 24th, a blizzard rolled over the region. The men stayed inside as the wind howled across the ice, shaking their shelter and driving snow through every crack. It lasted through the night. When they stepped outside the next morning, the landscape had changed completely. The ice field was broken apart, and nothing could be seen but open water. Baychimo was gone. Cornwell assumed she'd been crushed and pulled beneath the ice during the storm. Several days later, a local seal hunter reached their camp and reported sighting a ship still afloat, roughly 45 miles from their location. Cornwell and a few men followed him across the ice and found Baychimo caught in another frozen lead. She was battered but still upright. They boarded her, retrieved the most valuable furs, and secured what they could before turning back. With the season closing and the ice thickening again, saving her was impossible. They left her behind a second time, believing that would be the end of it. It wasn't. The Baychimo began a second life that would last decades. Within days of her final abandonment, she was spotted drifting about 300 miles east of her last known position. The ship that should have gone down was still moving through Arctic waters, carried by currents no one could predict. In January 1932, prospector Leslie Melvin encountered Baychimo during a journey from Herschel Island. He boarded briefly, finding her decks covered in snow but her structure intact, before continuing his trip south. By then, word of the ghost ship had begun spreading through northern settlements. That August, a group of 20 indigenous men found her near Wainwright and climbed aboard. A sudden storm trapped them on the vessel for a week before rescue arrived. They reported she was still intact, except for a crack along one side, damage that somehow hadn't sent her to the bottom. The pattern continued. In March 1933, another group boarded her and found themselves stranded for 10 days when weather closed in around them. By the time they escaped, the ship had drifted 250 miles from where they'd first reached her. That August, the crew of a small schooner spotted her locked in ice off Wainwright. The crew tried to tow her free but couldn't break the ice's grip. They salvaged what they could and left her behind. Sightings became routine through the 1930s and into the 1940s. Hunters and traders reported seeing her frozen solid in pack ice or drifting freely during summer thaws. In November 1939, Captain Hugh Polson boarded her with plans to salvage the vessel, but shifting ice forced him to abandon the attempt. It was the last time anyone is confirmed to have set foot on her deck. She continued to appear throughout the following decades. Some encounters were brief glimpses from passing ships. Others were close enough to confirm her identity beyond doubt. In March 1962, she was spotted still adrift, battered but recognizable more than 30 years after she'd been left behind. The final reported sighting came in 1969. By then she'd been wandering Arctic waters for 38 years, far beyond any ship's expected survival. What happened after that remains unknown. The sightings simply stopped, and the ghost ship that had refused to die finally disappeared for good. The Baychimo's survival defied expectations, but the reasons weren't supernatural. Her steel hull resisted the cold better than wood ever could. Arctic waters preserve rather than destroy, slowing rust and deterioration to a crawl. When ice caught her, she likely rose and drifted instead of fighting back. Other ships trapped in the same waters lasted months before being crushed. She lasted decades. Eventually, time would have done what the ice couldn't. Every collision, every freeze and thaw, weakened her a little more. By the late 1960s, she was probably taking on water with every drift. In 2006, the Alaskan government launched a search, flying grid patterns over her last known routes and scanning the seabed with sonar. Nothing was ever found. For nearly 40 years, the Baychimo moved between history and legend. To those along the Arctic coast, she became a story retold every winter. Most historians believe she sank sometime after 1969, her hull finally giving out. But without wreckage, her story stays open. What do you think happened to the Baychimo? Was she finally claimed by the Arctic, or is she still out there somewhere, drifting beneath the ice and fog? If you enjoyed this video, please like and share, and let us know in the comments what shipwrecks you want us to cover next. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Tune in next week for part 2 of our 4-part series on ghost ships, and until next time, keep exploring.